All right, and welcome to TA Brews TV, episode 11. I'm Mark, and I'm here with Ryan Ponto. How you doing? How you doing, Ryan?
Good. How you doing, Mark?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, mate. It's been a nice, chilled Sunday afternoon. A bit chilly over this way, but rather pleasant and dry. So, yeah, quite a nice weekend. Getting some Christmas shopping, trying to be organised. So, don't want to leave it to the last minute this year.
You're doing better than I am.
Because no doubt it'll still end up a mass panic as it usually does at the end.
That's just Christmas.
I'm trying to avoid it. Anyway, we are Transatlantic Brews, and we are here sharing another beer for the 11th time. So we're planning through these episodes each week now.
Well, it's technically the 12th because we did have that thing on Friday.
Yeah, of course.
With the whole bunch of people from Blab there, including Brittany Metz, who's been a very good supporter of us so far, which we're very grateful for. So it's nice to have a fellow beer enthusiast on your side. Yeah,
definitely. Cool. Well, what beer do you have for us this week, Ponto? What are you drinking?
I seem to be developing a line of local breweries, which is not a bad thing by any stretch. But this week, I've got the Tofino Brewing Company Kelp Stout, which, funny enough, on Friday we were talking about saltiness in beer. So I'm expecting there's going to be a little bit of salt, but I'm not quite sure what to expect.
Yeah, that's
very lovely bottle, though.
It is beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, It's really well designed. I can see that. I mean, even just on the camera.
It's got that lovely matte sort of finish to it, which adds that little bit of class on it. It's got, the drawing's quite lovely on it. Yeah. I saw this in the store and I had to pick it up just because of that.
Yeah, it's very well presented. Seems that some of the designs and everything on labels and cans, and actually cans in particular, are getting particularly creative, aren't they? Some of the designs on them and everything. And funnily enough, I have a canned beer this year, another Beavertown beer. Some of the vibrant colours on here and everything, contrasted with that black finish, is particularly well put together. Some really nice artwork. But anyway, it's their Holy Cowbell India Stout. So I guess it's a bit like a stout take on a black IPA or thereabouts. So expecting something of a dark roasty beer with plenty of hot punch. So it should be a good combo.
Now that reminds me again. There's another beer you had in a can that had a very Cinco de Mayo sort of look and feel to it, which that one does similarly. It's got the cow skull on it. And
essentially it's the same brewer because it was the one the Lemon Phantom. Do you remember? I did it was last week.
That's right.
Yeah, it was last week's beer anyway, but it's the same brewery, so that's probably why.
They seem to have a theme of that. Is that reflected on their website at all? Do you know?
Their website. I mean, obviously we can't share screens on Blab here, but if you go to their website, it's all that similar sort of look and feel across all of the labeling. So, some really cool artwork as part of the the packaging and everything. It's nice touch.
Cool.
Do you want to kickstart this week?
Sure. Why not? I have my proper stout glass.
Very good.
And a bottle opener, of course.
Good. I was just about to say I haven't got a bottle opener, but then I realised,
you don't need one. I actually tried last night. I was with a few friends, and I went to the Central City Liquor Store and got some beer.
Yeah.
And I bought a canned version of the IPA.
Oh, the Red Racer IPA.
Yeah, the Red Racer IPA.
Yeah.
And actually, the immense difference. I just had an IPA when I was in the pub with some friends after work, and now it's going to sound a bit too drinkish, shall we say? Then I was going later over to some friends' house for some cards and such, regular Saturday night thing.
Yeah.
And so I picked up some of the Red Racer IPA. It tasted so immensely different just coming from the can versus the bottle. And I think it's one of those things we've said it before, we've talked about it, but it's never been quite so obvious as a beer I know very, very well from on tap and bottle. Yeah. And then going to the can version, which is actually a recent thing they've had out.
Okay, that's interesting because technically,
it shouldn't matter.
Well, it can do because cans, although cans, I don't think have that air of sophistication in the same way as glass does in a bottle. From a technical viewpoint, if you just looked at the qualities for protecting the beer, you'd never do anything other than can because it's much less likely to get oxidized. in terms of the beer, so it's a much better sealed container for the beer, and also no light can get into these. So, obviously, clear glass has no protection. Green glass has a very minimal protection. Brown glass blocks most light, but still not 100% of the light, which obviously cans do. So they have that benefit. And also from an environmental perspective, they're more green in that they're less heavy. So they're in terms of the shipping and the general for the environment during that process, it's actually better as well. So from a technical viewpoint, if you were just looking at that, you would never use anything other than a can. But there's just something about glass that just is a little bit more, dinner table or let's say, sophisticated, friendly, if you like. It's snobby, but it's true.
No, I really wonder then, because we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Is it really that bad for that little bit of light to get in? Because brown ball, as you said, they block most of it. It's actually 85%. So that 15% of light that can get in, I wonder if that really has a positive effect. And because if you get too much light, obviously it skunks the beer and makes it taste awful. Yeah. So I wonder if that little bit of the same effect actually may help some beers improve.
I don't know the science entirely behind it. I just know that generally speaking, light, natural sunlight, if it gets in there, it's going to break down those hop compounds and give off that skunky, horrible flavor and aroma. And that just can't happen in cans. Incandescent light,
though, I think.
Sorry?
Something to look into, definitely.
Incandescent light is fine. You can have it in a fridge with incandescent light, and it will be totally fine. It's sunlight, natural light in that way. That just it reacts with the creates a chemical reaction with the compounds. So yeah. Anyway, something to look into. But
anyway, on with the beer.
On to the beer.
Enough chit chat.
Yeah.
As I'm pouring it, it seems a bit just a tad thicker than most of the stouts that I've been drinking.
Right.
Just off the top there.
Just pouring a nice thick head.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's quite a lovely looking pour. The head's nice and tight on that, which I do like.
Very attractive in that pint glass. Actually, I'm still waiting for my my set that has the stout glass in it.
You're missing out, my friend.
Yeah, no, it looks really good.
Now on the sniff, I can maybe it's just me mentally because I know there's kelp in there.
Yeah,
but it smells almost similar to sea air.
Oh, okay. Has that slight salty edge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's got that. Yeah, I can definitely smell the slight bitterness or roastiness that you'd expect from a stout.
Mm.
But there's also, what is that? It's almost like a bit citrusy, almost like there's a bit of lemon or something. Yeah.
Okay.
So quite interesting combination of aromas. It smells quite pleasant though.
Huh. Is it hopped fairly heavily? Do you know, or is it just meant to be a? Or maybe
it's not very heavily hopped. No, not from what I can smell anyway. It didn't really say too much on the website about it, but yeah, it's I think it's intended mostly just to be a nice sort of easy drinking, very full bodied, sort of thing with just a lot of different flavors in it. Now the hops used, I'm not quite sure what they are, but they seem kind of minimal at this point.
So maybe some of that's coming from the kelp.
Possibly, but
yeah, interesting.
On the flavor though, it's surprisingly light in terms of just the weight on the tongue and the mouth.
Yeah,
and it's got quite the pleasant sort of texture and coating, and it definitely has that sort of vegetal kind of taste to it in a very minimal way that doesn't make that very unpleasant. You know what I mean? You can very much taste the roastiness of it. You can taste a bit, almost a hint of salt in it.
Interesting.
And there's a juicy sort of citrusy sort of flavor to it as well.
Yeah.
But the overall impression though is quite the roasted barley roasted malt, that sort of thing, as you'd expect. But it's got quite the pleasant combination with a bit of salt and a bit of citrus in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we talked on the beer con the other night about how, I mean, obviously one of the reasons you've chosen this beer, just about the saltiness in beer. Generally, in stemming, it just sounds like a weird combination. It just sounds like there's something that just wouldn't work. It's like salt and beer, but obviously there's the historic German style Goza, which is gaining popularity, practically an extinct style until recent years, where it actually does have salt in there. So yeah, it's interesting. I'd really like to try one. I've not actually got around to trying one of those at all, so I'm dying to get hold of one. But this is probably the closest thing you've been able to get to, I guess, the kelp element, but.
Could be. I do have to say this is surprisingly easy drinking.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing that's stopping me from just continuously pouring it down my throat, so to speak, in a very charming way, shall we say.
Yeah. Dangerously drinkable.
It's dangerously good. And the alcohol content on this, it's 6%, so it's a bit above average, but I mean it's not too bad. You could have a few of these and be fine. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds good. Would you go for one of those again?
Definitely. I think it's gonna be one of my new stock at home beer.
Yeah, well, you're very much the roasty malt kind of guy, right?
Mm-hmm. Quite so. And you've got a stout today. Let's get you cracking on that. Yeah,
definitely. I think we have a viewer here. Hey, how's it going?
Oh, hi.
So yeah, I'm just about to crack into my beer, just as a reminder, since you missed the beginning of the show. But it's Holy Cowbell India Stout from Beavertown. Ryan's just been drinking a Kelp
Tofino Brewing Kelp Stout. It's quite good if you can get it.
Yeah, so we're doing a couple of stouts today. Mine's kind of an, I guess, a black IPA or highly hopped stout, if you like, in style. So both stouts with a difference this week. Crack mine open. Let's get to the taste. I don't have my stout glass as you do, as I just said earlier, but this is the next best thing.
Well, I was lucky enough to find one of the older sets that included the stout glass. I think they replaced the IPA glass in their four glass sets.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So for whatever reason, it's a shame, but
so they don't do the IPA glass in that set anymore.
No, they don't do the set with the stout glass anymore. I think they replaced it with the IPA glass in that 4 glass set.
Right, I see. Okay. Ooh, interesting aroma. Because it has that roasty, chocolatey coffee element that you would get from a stout, but with kind of a citrus edge. Okay. And I guess that's the hops in there. Oh, really quite a intoxicating aroma. Tons of chocolate. That sort of roastiness you get with a nice dark. What's a chocolatey roast tasting coffee? You're the coffee expert.
Well, Verona was one of the ones I picked for my stout, and that one is quite. It's sweet roasted and full of cocoa.
Okay, yeah, that's. I've had that previously before the Verona, and yeah, I remember really liking it. But obviously, has that chocolatey element, as you say.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, so, yeah, it sounds like you could do an infusion with the Verona blend on that one.
Yeah, quite easily, or even a coffee that has kind of almost a vanilla, oaky vanilla kind of edge would probably go quite well with this.
Right,
infusion with it. But yeah, that's the aroma. Very, roasted stout, pocket coffee element, only with that extra something with the hops. Just going for the taste. Cheers. Oh, lovely mouthfeel. Really rich, warming, smooth, almost marshmallowy, lovely, pleasant sweetness up front, followed by that dry, roasted barley kind of bitterness. And then the hops kind of come through at the end, that slight tropical citrus hop element. This is incredibly good. Very, very impressive. It's like the best of both worlds for me because I really like dark roasted coffee flavors from beers, but I also really love citrus, fresh, North American hops. And this for me is like the best of the two infused together. So, black IPAs were all the rage, I guess, a year or two ago. Sort of tapered off a little bit. Now you don't see quite so much hype over them. But for me, I think they're a really valid style, actually, as part of that kind of fusion of two different styles into one to push things forward.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely lingering taste, not too dry on the finish, but there's a bit of dryness from the malted barley and roasted barley there. Very, very nice. Yeah, I could drink quite a lot of that.
Now, is yours filtered or unfiltered?
As far as I understand, I think it's unfiltered. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, see, I'm just looking on the label here to see if there's any kind of clues. But they tend to do pretty unfiltered beers at Beavertown. They go for the natural approach.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I can't be certain, so I don't want to say for sure. But I think it's totally unfiltered.
Yeah. I know Tofino tends to have an affinity for unfiltered and bottle conditioned beers, so I think it just adds to the character of it. Honestly, just the fact that I'm drinking actual kelp right now.
When you well, it's like you buy the sea, but I mean, when you filter a beer right, if you over filter a beer, I think you just lose flavour. Ultimately, it's a little bit like I don't know what's the comparison. If you take something out of something, I don't know. It's like having, if you have an orange juice that still has all the bits and stuff inside it, it's going to be more flavoursome, right, than than one that's had that removed. Ultimately,
yeah. I think that's a big debatable thing depending on your flavor preference, because it has a lot to do with texture, of course, that way too.
Yeah,
not just flavor.
And that changes your perception of taste. And some brewers will do like a light filtration, so you still get some of that lovely stuff coming through, but it's not totally cloudy, and you still get some decent clarity in the beer as well. So, I think there's a lot of personal preference going on there as to what you prefer. But you can definitely over filter a beer though when you get and certainly some bottled beers that are totally filtered and pasteurized to death just taste pretty damn awful, and they just lack that. You can tell when something's been over pasteurized. I don't know fully how to explain it, but there's a kind of a feel and a flavor about it that just tastes fake.
Right.
If you know what I mean. It's just it loses all that authenticity. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to if anybody's watching is a big coffee drinker, I'm sure you've had a different flavor from the same coffee going through a regular coffee machine versus a French press versus a pour over, right? Yeah. It's probably at least two of those three, and the flavor is immensely different.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You have it in a French press, and there's much more of that grittiness that really affects the mouthfeel and flavor in there in the coffee versus having it in a filter where you just don't have that at all. Big difference.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly, for convenience sake in the morning, as you're groggy and getting up, and if you're like me and drink coffee all day, you have a timed coffee pot. Well, you can't really have a timed French press, as much as I'd love to.
I'm sure there's a machine out there that probably does it.
I'm sure there's some contraption that you could make or put together and just be insane, and it'd be probably quite the gong show of a thing. It'd probably be like Dr. Seuss's house or something. You have like a boot spinning around, hitting a flap that's lighting a match on something, and who knows what. Or
like the gadgets on Wallace and Gromit. I don't know if that will mean anything to you in North America.
Yes, I used to watch it as a kid. Something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. Getting back to the point of it, it's an immense change in just how you perceive something and how it's flavored. And I mean, similar to the beer world, I think, where most beer is it's the mass produced stuff, Anheuser-Busch and all that. Of course, the big merger is going to get bigger and bigger is the idea.
Yeah.
Ironically, they're losing market share though, slowly, little by little, which is the promising part, I think. In a way.
Well, their sales are. While beer sales overall are dropping, it's not craft beers that are dropping. It's
the mass-produced.
The big guys, yeah. People are just tired of the same stuff and just drinking marketing. essentially. People are tired of it, and it's a well known fact. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it would be interesting to see what happens with this merger and what they do with the distribution network as a result. So that's a heck of a lot of power. 2/3 of the US beer market. That's huge.
Yeah. But back to the point, it's similar to how people drink this stuff so much, comparatively to craft beer, and it's that whole very filtered, very clear, very light, which is very similar with coffee. I find, because there's a lot of people that I work with and I meet that drink coffee, but they will only drink it from a filtered pot.
Yeah,
and that's because they find that the flavor from French press it's too much, it's too bold, there's too much going on, and I've heard oftentimes they don't like that little bit of sludge you get at the bottom from the finer bits that get through the filter.
Yeah,
they just can't handle it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like your tastes develop as you get older, but if you're not adventurous enough to try these things and give it chance, then you never really give you never push the boundaries of your taste buds, and ultimately, I think you miss out. And it is just a lack of a willingness to try new things that really ultimately leads to that mentality is, oh no, I can't touch that. That's too much. That's too much. Whereas, maybe we're a little bit weird in that we pushed out to try these things. Maybe at first, maybe it was a bit intimidating when you first tried it, but ultimately, when you push through, it's so much more rewarding. And that might sound a little bit strange, a little bit like you're deliberately putting yourself through something that you don't like. I know there's a psychological term for that, isn't there?
Masochist, shall we say?
That's the one. Yeah, but ultimately, it's I think that there's just having a bit more adventure about your taste and trying to push the boundaries. Ultimately, I think rewards you over time. Is my point.
Well, and that's not for everybody, but it definitely does have a reward at the end of it. And it's just, do you have the willpower to push through it, or the want to find something better?
Yeah.
Or are you happy where you are? And I mean, at any stage of that is okay, because everyone's going to be different on that spectrum of that.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to want a craft beer. Not everyone's going to want different flavors. Not everyone's going to want to try kelp or try, whatever it is in their beer.
Yeah.
I mean, some people use fish and squid and whatever else in their brews, and people will just outright say no, right? Just because it's such an odd thing.
But the story I can remember, though, is just pushing yourself a bit further, is the first time I tried super hoppy beers, I didn't like them. And now I can't get enough of them, and I just feel if I hadn't have gone back and tried them again, I'd have missed out on a whole world of flavor. I think it's worth it.
I mean, what's one or two bad taste experiences for potentially a lifetime worth of rewarding flavor?
I think a lot of it's mental as well. Like it's not necessarily that it's bad. It's just it's so different when you try it that you
classify it such as bad.
Yeah, your brain's almost fighting it. But if you just realize that a lot of it's in your head, and if you just try and sit back from it for a second and take it in isolation for what it is and what it's meant to be, then you can better digest it and better understand it and get to that point quicker of expanding your horizons, if that makes sense. Or am I just talking?
Well, it's a whole psychological game, and bear in mind that I'm not a specialist in psychology by any stretch, but from what I understand of it is, if it goes against something that you become accustomed to, or if it goes against something that is ingrained in you from childhood, like there's a whole debate on whether you can change things that your mother or father did throughout your childhood. Yeah. For instance, just buying habits. Something as simple as buying a brand of soap. Yeah. They've been doing studies on this stuff, and it's so difficult for people to get out of this habit of buying this one brand. So if your mother liked to buy Dove soap and you grew up with it and it's been ingrained in you since day one, what's the likelihood you're going to try a different brand of soap?
Yeah,
when you start buying for yourself.
It is interesting, isn't it? I can see how that mentality materializes and how that kind of comes about.
And so to tie this back into beer, if your dad or your mates or whoever you have seen drinking, if they're all drinking mass-produced lager and that's it, or most of them are. That's ingrained in you from the time you're drinking.
It takes a long time to change that sort of mentality, doesn't it? Or it takes.
You have to have a want to change it.
It can take. That's why it's taken since the late 70s, early 80s, the beginnings of craft beer in North America. That's why it's taken this long to even get to this point, because it takes generations to change perceptions to that magnitude. It does.
Well, the idea with that perception is it takes 3 generations to truly accept a new ideal. Right? That a generation is defined as 20 years, so it takes 60 years to accept something. So if we start something now, we'd have to be roughly about 90 before it's widely accepted. You know what? That's far too long to expect to keep going with one thing, but if you imbue that in a younger group of people, they'll bring it up, and it'll keep changing and morphing until it gets there 60 years later.
Yeah, and that all completely makes sense, and I think that sounds about right to me.
Mm-hmm.
Every 20 years or so, but 60 years for something to actually, come to fruition. Really, ultimately,
that's one hell of a pipe dream.
Yeah, it is. Change happens slowly. But anyway, it's a really exciting time for craft beer, I think, now. We're at a point now where it's really gained momentum. I mean, do you think now we've got to that point where it's, if you think about it, the 80s is probably, but if your calculations are correct, it's another 30 years before it's widely accepted as normal.
For craft beer.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the beginnings of it anyway. There's small pockets in larger cities and areas and mainlands where there's tons of craft beer available. Right? It's become such the large niche that I think it's starting to get into that point where it's becoming. It's what 16% of the beer market right now.
Yeah.
That's not a small piece, really.
No.
When you think about how many independent people are going out there, it's not one big corporation that controls most of it.
Yeah.
It's literally an ideal of several different people coming all together to make this happen.
Yeah, completely. And 16% is pretty good. That's grown a lot over the last few years. Bear with me a second. I'm just going to do a quick Google search to find out what that is in the UK, because I don't actually know. Size.
Well, I can tell you off the top of my head, BC, British Columbia, is the highest consuming province of craft beer in the country of Canada.
That doesn't surprise me.
Not at all.
No, BC, that sort of makes sense for BC, I think.
Well, BC's always been sort of an experimental sort of province in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think it all started with the government just pushing pilot project on us after pilot project for new systems and whatever else. But I think just that mentality of change and going with it and trying it first is kind of stuck as a result of some of that, coupled with just the general differences among everybody. Like there's such an influx of different people and immigrants versus people moving across country and just all that sort of thing.
It's the most cosmopolitan of all of the provinces in Canada. So that would completely make sense to me. I'm not finding it easy to find this information with just a quick search for the UK. British Beer Renaissance. Let's try this.
I do imagine it's probably somewhere on the, maybe a little higher, because I think the people in England are a little more primed towards non-mass produced beers in some manner. Yeah,
I get the feeling that it might be a larger percentage in the UK, but it depends what you classify as a craft brewer, of course. Because there's a lot of people that are almost like the traditional real ale breweries. They don't consider them to be craft beer, and it's this kind of imported American term that doesn't quite fit in the UK. And really, ultimately, I think I've mentioned it before about how Camera obviously saved cask beer in the 70s from total oblivion, but ultimately what we were left with in terms of what was acceptable with cask beer at the time was these kind of this very one-dimensional view of what good beer was, and ultimately it's taken a long time to come around. And craft beer, really, I think, is probably more of the relevant term these days than what CAMRA calls real ale, because they don't accept, as part of their description of what real beer is, they don't accept keg beers at all. Now, keg production's moved on a heck of a lot in the the years since the 1970s, when CAMRA was formed and saved cask beer in the UK. And I don't think you can discriminate just purely based on dispensary method. I think they've got a very closed view of what real beer is, and ultimately I would say that their term that they like, which is real ale, they call things real ale, and that obviously is not very inclusive of things like lager. And obviously there's a wealth of lager out there, and it's not all just the mass produced stuff. There's some really good high quality stuff as well, and you can't say that that's not real beer just because it's not cask conditioned ale. So really, I think ultimately you're facing a situation in the UK where, yes, there is much more of that kind of cask ale culture and everything, but ultimately, what's the point I'm trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make is essentially that I think there's a conflict of interest in terms of terms here. So what's craft beer versus what's real ale, and are they both just essentially well produced good beer? And ultimately, if you had to pick one term that was more all-inclusive and relevant to the entire beer market, no matter how the beer is dispensed, then it's got to be craft beer as a term, as the way forward, really. And ultimately, real ale becomes a defunct term. It was relevant for saving cask beer in the 1970s and pushing through into the 80s and everything. But I think ultimately now it's a defunct term. It's not relevant for today's beer market. So but my point is that there's this conflict between sort of traditional real ale, cask beers, and craft brewers which use a mixture of cask production, keg production, whatever suits them for the dispensary method, for the venue and for the location and for however they want to serve their beer. But they're all produced in a small artisan craft manner. So ultimately, yeah, it's harder to put your finger on what section of the market is considered craft in the UK. So it might be harder, returning to the original point, it might be harder to actually determine what size of the what counts as that independent size of the market, or what counts as the craft beer sector of the market, because there's that conflict of interest in the terms, if that makes sense. Now you'd have to amalgamate all of the UK real ale breweries and the new wave craft producers, which are much more American inspired, and you'd have to then just say, well, now separate the big conglomerates like Molson Coors, Scottish and Newcastle, and all those sort of big mass producers, what they used to call the Big Four. But yeah, I think that kind of makes the point. I should dig those figures out, and we'll put together a piece on them. But I think it'd be interesting.
Another thing to consider is, at what size do you consider a brewery not to be craft anymore, or is size really irrelevant so long as they're always improving and always creating new things with better ingredients?
Yeah, and you can get really snobby about this, I think. There's a lot of snobbery out there, I think, with that. And ultimately, I don't really care how big a brewery is, so long as they're still producing a quality product. I don't even really care if they get bought out, so long as the product remains the same. Now, sadly, in most cases, it tends to deteriorate and tends to, as things get bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes harder to control and get a good margin. And there's lots of pressures that come from, for example, if a brewery has kind of stakeholders to kind of answer to at the end of the day, then there's a lot more commercial pressures to make more profit. And so it makes it harder to maintain those sort of small artisan values that you started out with. So there is a correlation between it being bigger and being potentially lower quality as a result. But it ultimately doesn't matter. You've got to use your taste buds and decide for yourself. It shouldn't just be automatically, I think, they're big now, they're irrelevant, and just writing them off.
I think you do see a lot of people doing that these days, where if it's not all of a sudden this one little, garage-sized area that they're brewing their beer out of, and they've moved into a bigger area, well, now they're seen as a bigger and, a big bad brewery.
Yeah.
No longer a craft beer or a brew pub or what have you.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, you are right in saying that quite oftentimes the quality does deteriorate as more people are involved with the process, and they get bigger and they involve more steps and blah, 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 and all these pressures that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think some bigger ones can truly maintain if they're not so worried about cutting costs and letting, the term that we like to use all the time when we're talking about business and numbers and all that, they don't let the accountants take over.
Yeah.
I mean, having worked so many years at Long McQuaid previously and currently, you definitely see a deterioration in product quality as the accountants take over, especially when an event like the recession happens in 2008.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you see all the quality start dropping because everyone's worried about money. But I mean, it doesn't have to be as big as a recession. It can be just as big as now your profit margin shrunk by about 3 or 4%. You got to get back up. And I can only imagine the difficulty that a master brewer would have to go through to deal with that, especially when they're used to creating small batch quality product.
Absolutely. I think somehow if they can maintain their values and hold back the pressures, which is an incredible challenge, then it should be possible to be a bigger end of the craft brewery scene, if you like, or become a bigger brewer and still maintain a quality product. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with obviously Brewdog have become very, very big now, and a lot of people now dismiss their beers as not craft beer anymore or whatever. But ultimately, if they stay true to their values, I mean, they I think Martin Dickey, the main brewer over there, says he will never sell out. If they can maintain that ethos throughout, there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do that.
Well, and I think they've come to a very creative solution that lets them keep their values. They have that whole Equity for Punks program going on, which is unfortunately not available in Canada, because I definitely would have bought into it at some point, just for fun, if nothing else. Yeah. But they can raise the money they need to invest further and to get bigger and to get more product out there and build up their pub system and whatever else they need to, but all based off the people that like them. So if they become a horrible brewer, then all of a sudden they're not going to get any more money from this Equity for Punks. People will stop contributing. Yeah. No, exactly. And they'll just shrivel up at some point. So I think you really have to look at that as one of their lifelines to keeping their quality. If their quality just disintegrates.
Absolutely, they should be held accountable by their own shareholders. If they're owned by the fans of the brewery in that way, then they have to stay accountable to them. As you say, it shouldn't be viewed. A brewer having more funds available to them, more equity available to them, should not be viewed as the end of the world. It should be viewed as, well, they've now actually got some backing behind them to really take this further. That's how it should be viewed, but it isn't typically, because people just view big business as evil, and it's not always the case. So, and
going back to what I was saying about Long McQuaid earlier and seeing different things happen.
Yeah,
I mean, you remember when you worked there?
Yeah,
all those years ago. It was a relatively small company in the world of corporate business. In the music industry, though, it was a giant, obviously, always.
Yeah,
from the time I can remember. But I mean, through the years, people would complain about how they're getting more and more corporate because there's more staffing, there's more levels to the head office structure, corporate structure there. But they've just improved on what they've been able to offer as a result of it. Yeah. I mean, for instance, they never had this years ago. They didn't have the vacation homes you can rent for a ridiculously cheap price. You just have to get there, right? Yeah. So they don't have 2 vacation homes you can rent. One in Whistler locally, and then one I think in it's not San Francisco. It's is it Florida? I think they have it in. No, Orlando. Orlando. They just bought one recently in Orlando
for employees.
For employees, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They don't rent out to the public. It's anybody who's employed at the company can apply for the vacation time.
Yeah.
And if you get it, you just pay the money to Long McQuaid, and you've got it booked for the week or weekend or whatever you did. And I mean, it's stuff like that you can see is improving as they become bigger.
Yeah.
And if most companies followed something of that line of, we have more available, let's make it better for the people that we have with us and for the people who are dealing with us.
Yeah.
And not worry so much about gaining extra profit as the end all be all. I mean, naturally you will, but if you take those steps, you'll ensure further growth later and sustain it.
What's the staff retention element, and of course, smaller brewers, I would imagine, have a real problem with staff retention, because obviously they might not be able to afford to pay the salaries that people want to retain the staff. So ultimately, if a brewer gets more backing behind them, they're more likely to be able to retain the quality people that make the business,
or attract new ones to take it that next step further.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all it's all relevant. All these things. I mean, you use the example of the music store in Canada along the McQuaid, but all those elements are still relevant for for brewers or any business for that matter. So it
really is, yeah. Well, I think we've blabbed on for quite enough today.
That was a long one. Yeah,
it was very good though. We got into some deep conversation there. I think. Hopefully, anyone who's watching found that very, very helpful in their view on the beer industry. If you have a different opinion, of course, feel free to contact us and let us know, and we'd appreciate a different viewpoint as always. You can email us at info@transatlanticbrews.com. We will have this up on Blab, of course, as replay because it is recording, and we'll have it on YouTube as well. If you do want to head over to the website, it's transatlanticbrews.com, and you can sign up on the mailing list there and get our weekly updates and see all our new stuff. I think that's it for me. I'm Ryan. That's Mark. Cheers.
Till next week.